I'm proud to be a steelworker. I always have been, I always will be. And I'm thrilled to be here speaking on behalf of Angie Horvath as a labor critic. This union saved my life, and it started in a classroom just like this. I can't take credit for those words. They belong to Alan McDougall. Al is currently the program coordinator for the International's ERT, the Emergency Response Team. But back in 2002, Al McDougall was the education coordinator for my local, USW Local 6500 in Sudbury. I remember sitting in my first steelworker course, and it was workers training workers, and Al walked in and he said, "This union saved my life, and it started in a classroom just like this." That's a powerful statement. And I'm not telling stories out of school. What Al was talking about was an addiction problem that he had for years, and the union did save his life. Al credits the union for that. He even wrote a book about it called Breaking Through that I recommend to all of you. But that statement on the first day of the first union course I ever took, it's often at the back of my mind. Like today, the theme for this conference is Power Up. Don't stop until you've changed the world. And I'll tell you, brothers and sisters, this union has changed my life. And it all started in a classroom just like this. Make no mistake, whether this is your first conference or your 21st, whether you're new as an activist or you've been active for decades, you're in a classroom this week, and it's going to inspire you to power up. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My parents were separated when I was 2 years old, and my mom raised my sister and I by herself. I grew up in poverty. My mom worked as a secretary, and we had so little money that we lived in geared-to-income housing. And in the 80s, my mom opened a small cleaning company, and they cleaned houses and small offices, and she pulled my sister and I out of poverty. I'm not talking about rich, I'm talking about not being poor anymore. We moved out of Sudbury housing. We bought back-to-school clothes at Sears for the first time in my life instead of the Salvation Army. My mom was a role model. It wasn't easy, but I could see that hard work would pay off. So when I graduated from high school, we took out loans, I worked 2 part-time jobs, and I went to college, and I was the first in my family to graduate from college. But there were no jobs. There were just short-term contracts offering minimum wage. I thought I made a mistake. I thought I shouldn't have gone to college. I should have went to university. And so I went to university, and I was the first in my family to graduate from university. But again, there were no jobs. Just short-term contracts offering minimum wage or sometimes slightly more. But those weren't careers. In fact, I spent the first decade of my adult life working short-term contracts and precarious jobs while trying to whittle away a mountain of student loan debt. A decade. I had done everything right. I had followed all the rules. I had a college diploma. I had a university degree. I was married. We had a son, Sam. My wife and I waited 4 years till we had our second child, Thomas. My wife and I were waiting for our precarious jobs to become careers. We were waiting for a light at the end of the tunnel that was never coming until I got a union job, until I became a steelworker. In 2012, I was hired as a steelworker at the Coppercliff smelter. I was 30 years old, and for the first time in my life, I had a career. Not a job where you couldn't plan for the future, but a career where you could raise a family. I was a furnace operator, and I belonged to a union that fought for safety. I belonged for a union that fought for workplace dignity and that fought for fairness. My wife and I bought a house. We had a daughter named Ella. We weren't rich, but we were finally middle class. But that's not the end of the story, brothers and sisters. That's the beginning. Because in a union, you learn that leadership is never about me. Leadership is always about we. Less than 6 months after I was hired, I was sitting in a steelworker classroom learning about health and safety. And as you know by now, Al McDougall came in, and Al said, "This union saved my life, and it started in a classroom just like this." And in that classroom, I learned about 8 steelworkers from Elliott Lake, and some of you know this story. They were uranium miners. They were worried about the high rates of disease and cancers. The mines and the provincial government told those workers, they told their families, it had nothing to do with the workplace, that maybe they smoked too much, that maybe it was a coincidence. And one day, Homer Sege, a steelworker with a grade 8 graduation from Sudbury, attended a conference in Paris on workplace disease and occupational disease. Homer registered as Dr. Sege. And he hears the government of Ontario speaking about the harmful effects of radiation, about the studies they're doing based on data they gathered from uranium miners in Elliott Lake. And so in 1974, 8 steelworkers from Elliott Lake refused to go to work that morning. And shortly thereafter, they're joined by nearly 1,000 more. And shortly thereafter, they're joined by their community. And shortly thereafter, they're joined by the NDP. And they held a wildcat strike, not for wages, but for health and safety. And the NDP convinced the government to have a safety commission. It was called the Ham Commission, and it produced 117 recommendations. And those recommendations, the ones that were accepted, are now known as the Occupational Health and Safety Act for Ontario. Think about that. Because of those steelworkers in Elliott Lake, every worker in Ontario, steelworker or not, unionized or not, every worker in Ontario has the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Every worker in Ontario, because of steelworkers in Elliott Lake, have the right to know, the right to participate, and the right to refuse unsafe work. Those are steelworkers that powered up and changed the world. And this is a union that changed my life. Because as time went on, I moved on from taking those union courses to delivering them. I became an instructor. I became an activist, standing up and speaking on behalf of workers, training steelworkers to become leaders and activists too. It amazes me sometimes to realize that I'm now a member of provincial parliament, that I have an office at Queen's Park, that I have a desk in the provincial legislature. Because prior to the provincial election, the last time I had been inside Queen's Park was in 2009 during our strike. I was there with 2 busloads of steelworkers from Sudbury, from Local 6500. We were joined from steelworkers from Port Colborne. I think we lasted about half an hour. And we were escorted out of the gallery and out of the property. Now they hold the door open for me and they call me sir. Before that strike, I honestly didn't think that the government cared about people like me. But in 2009, we went on strike for a year, and the NDP was the only party that showed up. Think about that. We had 10 picket lines at plants and mines scattered across Greater Sudbury. 10 picket lines that were active 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the NDP was the only party to show up. Not just show up, but actively support us on the picket lines and speak at our rallies and go to Queen's Park and speak on our behalf and go to Ottawa and speak in the House of Commons on our behalf. Only the NDP showed up. Only the NDP had our backs. My friends, I'm proud to be here speaking on behalf of Andrea Horwath and the NDP. Not just because I'm in her caucus, not just because she's the leader of the official opposition, not just because I'm the labor critic, but because I met Andrea Horwath on a picket line. I met her in the middle of the night in Garson. No press, no photographers. She was standing beside a fire barrel trying to keep warm. She was speaking to strikers steelworkers in the middle of a Sudbury winter. Brothers and sisters, I'm proud to be here speaking on behalf of Andrea Horwath because over the past decade, she's walked countless picket lines with me. And if you walk a picket line with me, brother, I'll stand by you forever. I was raised to believe that if somebody helps you move, then you have to help them too. You have to pay your debts. So when the strike ended, I volunteered for the NDP. I joined their executive and I volunteered for every election since the strike. I did every job I was able to. You may not know this, but the labor movement isn't just a friend and an ally of the New Democratic Party. The labor movement is a founding partner, and I'm proud to say that steelworkers were first in line. And I'm proud to say that the only real Labour Party in Ontario is the NDP. And while the Liberals and Conservatives continue to attack organized labour, while they sit on their hands about anti-scab legislation, while they sell off public assets like Ontario Hydro to their wealthy and well-connected friends, while they legislate workers back to work instead of working towards negotiation and fair settlements, the NDP will always be proud to stand up and fight back for the rights of the working people. A lot of people are worried about what Doug Ford has in store because the majority of Ontarians didn't vote for cuts. The majority of Ontarians didn't vote for layoffs. The majority of Ontarians didn't vote for the privatization of the things that matter the most to us. And as the official opposition, New Democrats will be the voice for the majority of Ontarians. Our job is to do more than just hold Doug Ford accountable for his decisions. Our job is to be constructive and to put forward real solutions that will help the people of this province. You can count on New Democrats to stand up for the rights of working people. You can count on New Democrats to continue to fight to make it easier for every worker to have a union card in their hand. You can count on us to stand against cuts and privatization, and you can count on us to stand up for good jobs in Ontario like the ones we have as steelworkers. When members of my union asked me if I'd consider running as an NDP candidate, knowing that the steelworkers are a founding member of the party, knowing that Andrew Horwath walks picket lines, knowing that Andrew Horwath believes that the quickest way to the middle class is with a union card, knowing that I have the support of my union, my steelworker sisters and brothers, that makes the decision pretty easy for me. Because there's nothing I love more than representing workers and speaking on their behalf. And being an MPP and a Labour critic for the NDP is just a larger stage to do that. It's another example of a steelworker who powered up. The world is thirsty for leadership. And a lot of people feel like they aren't prepared for it. A lot of people think they aren't ready for it. And I'm here to tell you that you are ready. There's nothing special about me. There's nothing special about anyone I've ever met in a leadership position, except that at some point they put their hand up and they said, I need to make a difference. Think about our union. Building unity and strength for workers is literally what USW stands for. Unity and strength for workers. Honestly, what we do as a union is we find people who are interested and we give them the skills and ability, or we enhance the skills and ability they already have so they can be successful. This union makes leaders, and I'm proof of that. I wouldn't be here today if I wasn't a steelworker. I'm proud to say that. But the first step is coming forward and letting someone know that you want to get involved, because we're always looking for activists to get involved. All you have to do is put your hand up. All you have to do is believe that this union will change your life, and it'll all start in a classroom just like this. Thank you, brothers and sisters. On behalf of Andrew Horwath and the entire NDP caucus, be proud of your union. Be proud to be New Democrats. Be proud to stand up for the rights of working people. Be proud to power up, and don't stop until you've changed the world. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, miigwech.